What's up? Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to build a feature into Craftwork. We're going to build a little API integration. We're working on our funnel today. I thought I might take you along. So let's dive right in. The goal for this is to save some UTM params and some other like marketing funnel attribution type things in our database so that we can look at, okay, this was a project that came in that generated X dollars. And we want to be able to tie that back to what was the source that this came from? Was it from a Facebook ad or was it from a Google ad that we displayed? So we use a tool called Posthog for a bunch of product analytics and some other things. And we have some Posthog IDs for our funnels. And the thing that we're actually storing is the ID of something called a session recording. And I've got Postman up here. We can fetch a session recording. We need like the project ID from Posthog and then also the ID of a session recording. And this is all authenticated with an API key. We get back a bunch of stuff about the session recording, like how long it recorded and some other things. But what we're most interested in are these marketing properties. So there's a bunch of different properties that are available about the session. So what browser they used and was there UTM params inside of that. Our goal for today is going to be to add support in our Rails application for taking that Posthog recording session ID that we are receiving when someone goes through estimate submission flow on the website. We're going to take that and store it in the database. So right now we have just the ID, but we have a couple options, right? We could figure out what are all the properties that we might get from one of those objects. And we could store a column in the database for path name and refer and initial OS and OS version and basically all of these different properties. But some sessions are going to have much less data than others. And because it's so free form and free flowing, and it depends also on the source that someone's coming from, if they're just going directly to the website or if they're going through a Google ad or something, like the number of properties are going to change a lot. So what I want to do is create a new model called traffic source, and I want to dump all that JSON into this meta blob that will contain everything that we know about that recording session. We'll also keep track of the session ID. This is going to be like the external ID for this traffic source going back to Posthog. If someday in the future we decided we want to use another analytics tool, or if we wanted to connect some other analytics tool that pipes in here, we could add a second external channel with that external ID. So for now, we could just default this to Posthog. We'll want to know what URL on the marketing site were they on, and did it include one of these different click IDs or one of these UTM params, and what was the referring domain? So this data is a subset of what's available in the JSON. So I want to build some sort of like adapter or something that knows how to look at this data and extract these different pieces. Not all of them are available as properties. So we'll have to do a little bit of URL wrangling, and we'll have to do some of this in the background. Okay, so let's get started by generating a model here. So we'll say Rails G model, and this is going to be called a traffic source. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to name this. I had a little conversation with ChatGPT. So we're going to give it an external. Okay. What else does this thing have? It has the meta, which is going to be a JSON blob, and then, or JSON B, which is not a JSON blob. And then we want the URL. We're going to want the GCLID, the FBCLID, the MS click. It's this thing. And then gbraid. All of these are going to be string values, and they're all optional. They don't necessarily exist. Okay. All right. I think that looks pretty good. We might also want to add fetched at as a date time. That way we know like when we most recently fetched this specific traffic source. If we think it's stale, we can go refetch it. But yeah, actually, we'll leave that for later. Let's start by generating this model. Let's open up the migration and see what we got here. Okay. So the external ID, we want to add an index on that because we will be probably joining to that. And we do want that to be unique. Okay, this is going to be default to empty. Yeah, I think the rest of this is actually optional. So we'll just leave the rest as optional here. This one is going to be null false. We must have an external ID if we create a traffic source. And then I think that's, yeah, that's going to be probably it for now. I could see an argument for adding indices for some of these other IDs if we need to join against some Google data or Facebook data eventually, but for now, this is good. So we can run our migration with Rails DB migrate. Okay, that's going to create our traffic sources. Let's go look at our traffic source object here. So we are using the Jumpstart Pro starter template. We've also added like the concept of discard into the generators, but I'm going to remove that. Let's call this a traffic source. Yeah, we'll leave it audited for now, but I don't know if we actually need it to be audited. And then we don't actually need to do any of these broadcasts because we're not going to have like views for traffic sources. This is going to be purely for reporting purposes. Okay. So now that we have this concept of a traffic source object and it has an external ID, what we can do is make a job that will fetch and create a traffic source. So we'll say Rails G job fetch traffic source. And okay. And this is going to take in the external ID and probably also the channel, maybe like the external channel. But for now, this is all going to just be Posthog. If later on we wanted to have this support something else, we could do some routing based on channel. All right, so we need to find or create a traffic source object with this ID. And then we need to fetch the data from the API and update the traffic source with the data. First thing first, we'll say traffic source is traffic source dot find or create by external ID. That looks good. Okay, so we'll come over here and that should have this external ID. Cool. And then what we want to do is fetch the data from the API. We're going to need to build a Posthog client that we can use to interact with the Posthog API. So we can say Rails G API client Posthog, and we can give this a few things now. So we're going to give it a URL of, what is the URL here? So the base URL is going to be app.posthog.com. And let's just start with that. Okay, so if we open up our Posthog client, now we should be good to go. So this is going to be .freeze. Okay, this was a change I had to make on every time I generated a client. So I'm going to go update the generator to add freeze onto the end of these URLs. So we're going to go to our client TT. Okay, so when we generate this, call freeze on the end of that thing. All right. In fact, let's just test to make sure that's working. So Rails D API client Posthog, and then we'll regenerate it, and it should have that frozen string Posthog client. Okay, great. So now this has freeze, and lint is happy. All right, we don't actually need any of these. We are just going to do a get request. Yeah, maybe we'll support listing all sessions for a given project. And we'll default the project to our main project here. So this is going to be our project. And what we want to do is send a request to /session recordings. And this is going to be our project ID. And we can call this recording sessions, and then find recording session by project ID and ID. And this is going to be the same thing here, but now we're going to have the ID of the recording session. And I don't know, let's see if this works. So we can open up Rails console and we can use our Posthog client. Notice that we're also generating this class method here that will initialize the Posthog client for us with the API token from credentials. That's handy so that we don't always have to look up what's our API key. I already actually put this in credentials, I think. Oh, the other thing is let's follow the best practices here. So this ticket is already in progress. We'll grab the Git branch, git checkout -b, or I think I already maybe created it. Oh, okay. Then git stash pop. Okay, so that should have my credentials. Okay. And then Rails console here. So if we do posthog client.client.recording sessions, boom. All right. So it made a request. So let's see what our response looks like. r.parsed body. All right. We got a ton of data there. All right. So then parsed body. And I think we get it back when we fetch the list of recording sessions. It's nested under results. So we should be able to say .results. Okay. .first. And this should be a recording session object stored as an open struct. That's cool. So then if we wanted to look at like session is that first one. So we can do like session.first. Yeah, session.person.properties is going to give us all these properties, and we can say .gclid, and that gives us the Google Click ID. That's pretty cool. We can also look at the UTM media, UTM medium banner. Okay, and then UTM source was Google, so it came from Google. So that is pretty sweet. Okay, so now what we want to try out is, if we do like session.id, that should give us back a session ID. And now we should be able to also say, using our Posthog client, can we grab a specific recording session, find recording session by, let's also pre-fill this project ID with 27593. Okay, and reload. Okay, so then we want to do posthog client.find recording session for the ID here. And we should get back our parsed body.person.properties. Nice. .gclid. Okay, amazing. Great. So we've got a little API client here that's going to work just fine for fetching data. So in our fetch traffic source job, we want this to fetch data from the API. So this is going to be like our recording session is equal to posthog client.session by ID, external ID. And that is going to come back with a full recording session object. And I think we want to, for now, we'll just update the traffic source with meta is going to be, is there a way, let's see, r.original body, okay, so we'll just pass r.body recording session.body in here. And I think that should store that as expected. Then we want to set a bunch of other things. So let's look at the traffic source. And okay, so we want to try to pull off and extract as much of these as we can directly from the properties. So let's also grab like the person data is going to be recording session.parsed body.person, right? r.parsed body.person. Okay. And that should give us back a person, or what's called a person object inside of Posthog. And I think the person object is going to have a lot of these things. I believe we can do something like fbclid is person.properties. UTM source, UTM medium, campaign, term, content, referring domain. So Copilot here is suggesting that we store the referrer separate from the referring domain, which makes me believe that we probably want to do that. So let's go add that because that also sounds valuable. So what I want to do is open up the migration for create traffic source. And I'm going to add in here refer. And then I think we can do Rails DB migrate redo. And it should roll it back and then roll it forward. Fantastic. And now we should see refer here. Great. All right. What else do we want? We want to have, okay. We want to have the gbraid and the gclid and the msclk ID and the URL and the wbraid. Okay. So I know from looking at the data that some of these are actually not going to be available directly on properties. But ideally, wbraid is someday on properties, but we might have to pull some of these off of some other part of this data. So if we look through all of our results here for wbraid, you'll notice that like in this specific result, so for this result here, we have a wbraid in the current URL's properties. And it's in the initial current URL, but it's not in the properties, like it's not in the person's properties directly. Also, this is called current URL. It's not called .url. So we'll have to figure out what we want to do there. So initial current URL versus URL, is there a big difference? It looks like those are probably going to be the same. Let's look at if we can see some other examples. Okay, so if we go down a little bit further here, we have another example where the initial current URL and the current URL are the same, and they both have this wbraid situation. So I think we might want to pull it off of this initial current URL. So yeah, so to do is pull wbraid off of person.prop or like initial. Did I copy it? No. Dot initial query string params. Okay, we've made some good progress, but before we go any further, I do want to start adding some tests because this is like the kind of thing where we want to make sure that we're actually getting the data that we need, that it's like creating these traffic source objects as expected. So let's go jump over into the job here and we'll start testing some stuff out. So this is going to test that it creates a new traffic source if none exists. Okay, so we want to call fetch traffic source job.perform now with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we don't actually want to go out and hit the API when we call this, but we do want to ensure that there's a difference in the number of traffic sources after we execute this. So we'll run this and we're going to get some error that says, hey, you tried to make an API call, and that's fine. We can go, oh, okay. Duplicate key violates unique constraint. This is because of our fixtures. So our fixtures are generating some stuff that has an external ID equal to my string and it should be unique. All right, so let's jump into the traffic source YAML file. This is generated for us also. And okay, it looks like it didn't actually generate this. It didn't know what JSON looks like. That's okay. This, I don't know, this is somewhat suspicious. Let's go look at our create traffic sources thing. Does this JSON be? Yeah, okay, that should be fine. All right, and then our external ID, this one should be like my string 1, 2, yeah, 1. And this one needs to be my string 2, and they need to be unique. And this should now maybe give us something different. Okay, great. So now it's failing because we're trying to make an external request and we're not allowed to do that in test, which is fantastic. We don't want to actually go out and hit API endpoints in test. but we can stub it. So let's grab that and say here that we want to stub this request. I don't actually usually include the headers here when I do this, but we can have it return this. So there's two options, right? Like one, we could stub the Posthog client so that it's not allowed to call this method, or so that this method returns objects that we expect. Or we can stub the API call. Technically, this job is going to use the Posthog client, and technically the Posthog client should be making assertions about the types of requests that are going out. Yeah, so let me show you what I mean. If we go to the Posthog client, this is going to have its own set of tests. And here, instead of authorization, we could test out that this is passing. Yeah, when we call client.recording sessions, we can assert that it's passing the right auth headers. When we initialize a new instance of a Posthog client with the test token, then it should make an API call to this /API projects. In fact, we can pass in a project ID here of 123 so that we don't actually accidentally use our real project ID. And yeah, so this should /session recordings. So this specific test, is this going to now pass? Okay, great. And then we can come back and implement a bunch of these later for rate limiting or other things that the API might support. But for now, we can keep it simple, and let's just add a test for test sends correct request to fetch recording sessions. So this is going to be, again, the stub this request, and cool. And all right. The other thing is that we can technically with webmock, we can assert that a specific thing was requested. And so stubbing it just prevents that it's getting called. Asserting that it was requested makes sure that the request actually happened. For instance, if we just comment this out and we run this test, nothing fails. Nothing is going to happen because this stub request doesn't make any assertions. And so this is only preventing that we're going to send anything outbound. If instead we add this assert requested and we comment out the exercise, so this is like setup, exercise, and then assertions, or make sure that the code did what you think it did. Now we have a failing expectation that okay, we wanted to see a GET request, but we didn't actually see one. So that's how we can make sure that this is actually doing what we think it's doing. Okay, so now we can also test that it finds a recording session. All right. And this is going to do the same thing. And thankfully, it's going to write it for me. Okay, so that looks good. All right, it passed. How do we know that it's actually working? One way would be to comment out our code that we think is working and then run it and watch it fail. So we want to see that red-green refactor type situation. All right, so now back to our job, So inside of our job here, I think that we actually want to stub the API call so that we can return a specific body here that has stuff that we know will be extracted. That way we can test that the parsing is working. I don't know, maybe the parsing should happen somewhere else too, but potentially we have a Posthog person object that gets the person thing and then wraps it up and spits back what we expect. Let's do the right thing. Let's do the right thing here. So inside of our clients, I'm going to add a new just plain old Ruby object called a Posthog person.rb. Oops, no, it needs to be named. That's what the class is going to be named, but Posthog person.rb. Okay, and in here we'll create a class called Posthog person, and it's going to be initialized with person data, just like the raw person object. And then we want this to return the things that we are going to extract on the other side here. Okay, we'll want to open up test clients. In here, we're going to add a posthog person test.rb. And this is going to basically be one just like this, where we want to have our test helper. Okay, so posthog person test. And we're just going to say it extracts the core properties as expected. And what's nice here is then we can pass in posthog person.new, and then this can follow the exact stuff that we're getting back from here. Perhaps we grab this JSON, or yeah, r.body json.parse, or puts r.body. There we go. Now it's JSON. Okay, let's grab that. And then here in our setup, we'll have some like person data. And maybe this is JSON. A cool thing you can do from Vim is you can highlight a line and then go into execution mode and say JQ and use JQ to format the stuff that's in your buffer. Ah, it's so cool. All right, so now this data, we have this giant JSON blob as person data, and we want to use it. So we like technically inside of our posthog client, when we fetch a recording session, this, like the response that we get back from this is being parsed by our application client. So let's go look at the application client, and there's like this get method, and it is using, okay, so it is using json.parse of that data, and it's passing in the open struct class. This is how it's serializing or deserializing the data into this object that we can then use, which is convenient. So here what we can do inside of our test is we want to actually create some object. So we have our person data. Let's actually just call that our JSON. And then we'll create a new like instance variable at person data. That's going to be json.parse the JSON with our object class. Object class is openStruct. Okay, so now this should look at person data. This should look like basically the same thing that we're getting back from the API. So now we can make assertions against this. So we can assert, yeah, like this ID here should match one of these IDs up here. This is actually like session data though. Session data. So maybe we can do like session data dot person. We really only need to extract the bits that are required for the job. So our job is the fetch traffic source job. And in here, we are looking for, yeah, so this is going to be like posthog person.new, and we'll pass in this person data. We'll get back a person object, and then we should be able to call like, let's actually make this like test FB CLID. And then up here, we will add in properties. So FB CLID is test FB CLID. And this should have an FB CLID directly on the person object. And then when we run this, we should get something back. Okay, why is it failing? Expected a hash key, not a hash close after person properties FB CLID. Oh, we're probably missing a comma or something. Oh, yeah, it's quite picky about how well formed the JSON is. All right, so now it's failing. Okay, undefined method FB CLID for posthog person. Great. That's the failure that we want to see. Okay, and now we can define a method FB CLID, which is going to come off of person properties FB CLID. Okay, got a passing test. Fantastic. All right. But rather than making a bunch of these methods, we can do delegate. Yeah, let's make a method here. Properties at person.properties. And then we'll delegate like FB CLID to properties and run this. Okay. And then there's going to be a bunch that we're going to be able to delegate to properties, but some that we are not. So let's just check FB CLID. Huh? No results. We got GCLIDs. All right, let's start with GCLIDs. GCLIDs. So we're going to change this to GCLID. Is it GCLID? GFBCLID? How do you say that? I don't know. Okay. All right, next up is going to be, yeah, let's split this and look at our fetch traffic source job. All right, gbraid. So if we look at our data, gbraid. Okay, so gbraid is one of the examples where it's not available in the properties. It's only available in this, either in the start URL or in the current URL or initial current URL. So we want to grab that initial current URL, which is going to be at, I don't know if that's actually going to work as expected. So let's just see if it does. So initial current URL. So I'm going to make this actually, yeah. Yes, let's keep all this stuff in here and we'll make this example.com. And I want to assert equal all of that stuff and the initial current URL. And let's just see if that pulls it out as expected. It does not, it's nil. And so I'm wondering if OpenStruct is going to let us do this as expected. So if we do JSON.parse this thing with object class OpenStruct, and then we say d dot initial current URL. No, yeah, so it doesn't like that, the $sign at the beginning. D dot person dot properties dot initial current URL. Yeah, that's not going to fly. That is not going to fly. So let's see if we can use, okay, great. So just using like the string indexing or like object, whatever it's called, object accessor syntax with square brackets should maybe give us that back. Let's see. Run our test. Moo. All right. Did I just moo? I mooed. I was going to say boom. And then I was going to say, I don't know, something else with an M. Okay. All right. We've got our Google Click ID. We've got our current URL. What I wanted to do with this current URL though, was like extract out some query string parameters. Yeah. Queries string params for URL in Ruby. There's likely going to be a URI parse method or something that we can use to get back the query string params. CGI.parse, I don't want to do that. Okay, here we go. Parse nested query, rack utils. Yeah, okay, so I think we want to use URI.parse. Let's see. Now we've got this URL back. So let's say URL is this thing, URI.parse URL.query. Okay, so that gives us the query string. And then we want to use this rack utils parse query, probably. Let's see. And nice. Okay, great. So that's going to give us some more properties. I'm almost wondering if we want to do properties.merge with some current URL quargs or something, def current URL. Yeah, query params. And then we can just do that current URL query params. Query. Okay, so let's do this thing. Rackutils parse query URI parse URL for the initial current URL.query. Okay, we're making a lot of assumptions here. One is that this is going to exist. Another is that, so we could say if it's blank, then return a empty dictionary, and that'll be fine because that'll merge with properties. And then, yeah, so another thing we could do here is, test out that this is going to work by checking, like we can add something custom in here. So we can say x equals 1 and check to see like assert equal or assert in, let's see, assert hash contains key with Ruby mini test. Just want to see if it has the key. Assert has keys. The person.properties should have X, or is that how it works? Assert has keys? I don't know. Undefined method merge for openstruct. Oh no. Openstruct doesn't have a merge method? Why not? Okay. Okay, so properties, maybe we just have to keep them separate. That's fine. That's all right. Okay, so then, yeah, we don't need this assertion here. All right. I think we're going to be able to get the FBCLID fine. The GBRAID is going to come off of the query params. So let's make a method gbraid, and this is going to come off of here. Yep. And then we'll do the same thing. MS click ID, MS click. Yeah. I don't think I am not seeing this. Do the same thing for that. I think we can pass the referrer. Okay. In this case, the referrer is going to be, oh, that came from YouTube. Interesting. All right. So the referrer is going to be on properties, but this one has a $sign. So we want to make a method probably. So we'll say, yeah, properties. And do we want the refer or the initial refer? I don't know, probably the initial one. And then same thing with referring domain. All right. And okay, we're making progress over here, but we're not testing it. So let's comment this out. All right, we want to test the gbraid ID. Test gbraid ID. And that's going to come off of the current URL. So our current URL, if it has a gbraid of test gbraid. All right. And then are we using, yeah, we're using initial current URL. All right, here we go. Okay, so does this work? Undefined method gbraid. See if we can get it to pass by commenting this back in. Okay, now our actual and whatever URLs are off. That's okay. All right, so then let's work on MS click ID. Is that what it's actually called? MS? Yeah, I guess it is. MS CLK ID. So we will again look in the query params for that, because this is, I think the initial current URL is going to be the most consistent. MS CLK ID is test. Okay. Same thing. Is that what we called it in the graphic source? MS CLK ID. Yeah. Okay. Just checking. All right. All right, let's test the refer. This should fail. This should pass. All right, now we need to test the referring domain. This should pass. Commented it in too quickly. Okay, and what else do we want? We want the, oh, all the UTM stuff. and the W braid. Assert equal test W braid. Okay, so that's also, I think, okay, that's also going to be on the URLs. So we can come up here and add W braid is equal to test W braid. Should still fail because we haven't implemented it. And then doing this should pass. Okay. And then UTM campaign, content, medium, source, term. All right, let's see if Copilot can do this for us. And does this one have UTM? All right, so we've got UTM medium source campaign on here. So we're gonna assert equal person.utm campaign is that. And fails. Because these are going to be in properties, I think we can do UTM campaign like this and delegate it down to the properties. Okay, great. And then assert UTM content. Did we put UTM content on the traffic source? We did. Okay. All right. So yeah, we'll do all 5. Content, medium, source, campaign, or term. And then our data up here doesn't actually have content, test content. I don't actually know what UTM content or term would do, but we're going to just pop them in there. UTM content or test content and test term. Run the test. Okay, we're probably, yeah, we've got a extra comma here. Doesn't like trailing commas. That's all right, JSON. It's all right. Okay, looking pretty good. Let's grab our current URL, update it, run our tests. Boom. Okay. I'm actually going to remove that assertion because that's fragile. And if we want to add stuff later, it might break it. So now let's assume that we have a Posthog person that knows how to parse Posthog person objects. And we will, yeah. So we've got this Posthog person object. And now we're basically just going to pass down these properties of the Posthog person object. I want to keep meta separate because that's going to reflect that it's just like the JSON from the thing. Otherwise, the rest of these should be, that one is actually going to be called, I don't know, should we just rename this thing to URL? Yeah, let's just call it URL. Simpler. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Okay, and then UTM campaign, UTM content. All right. Hey, I think we've got a job that will take in an ID, create a traffic source, update it based on the data that we get back from an API. I don't know. Let's give it a whirl. We've written a lot of code. We've written some tests with that code, but we haven't actually run any of it yet. I'm going to grab one of these IDs, one of these session IDs. And just for fun, we're going to say fetch traffic source job. Fetch traffic dot perform now, passing in that ID. And let's just see what happens. Okay. Hey, awesome. Awesome. We got a crash, which is fine. Undefined method FBCLID for Posthog person. Hey, that's like something that we just worked on, isn't it? Okay, so if we go back to Posthog person, FBCLID. Okay, we definitely did everything except that one, right? Okay, so I promise we had this one somewhere, FBCLID. FBC, oh, you know what? I like removed it and then, yeah, okay, that's fine. So we'll just pop that onto our current URL here, FBCLID. I think test Yeah, I'm not sure if that will be in properties or not, but it should definitely be in the URL. So let's watch our test fail. All right. And then let's watch it pass here. I think. Okay. So yeah, reload and then refire. Boom. Oh my goodness. Okay, what have we got in our traffic source.count? All right, we got one. Our last one, it has all this data. Is this meta thing going to work as expected? Meta, let's print that out. Hey, that looks like actual JSON. If we wanted to, could we say something like JSON.parse this thing? Wow, nice. Okay. And if we look at traffic.last. Okay. Hey, we've got a UTM source, UTM medium, campaign. This is looking great. A bunch of stuff is getting parsed out, and we've got the external ID here. That is fantastic. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. All right. What else? I think, yeah, we've got to go through and set up our API keys for production and then run a few different tests. I think also locally, I'll probably use the maintenance tasks gem to build a migration that will go out and hit the API to refetch a bunch of existing traffic source objects that we have. We'll be able to backfill and make associations between things happening in our marketing funnel. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.